So, welcome to the next project. Today we're going to take a sheep head and put it on a businessman in a suit. We're going to do kind of a head swap. So we're going to practice a couple of tools. We're going to play around with the liquify tool. We're going to do a couple things and practice some new tools. So you're going to need a couple of photos. We have these photos right here. We're going to have a place to place our background. We're going to have our sheep photo, and we're going to have the man with the suit photo. So this is going to be a little bit more of a challenge this time because cutting out the sheep is not going to be so simple. But we're going to use some tricks to be able to cut it out, but to be able to add some better selections a little bit later. So we're going to see if we can't go to our select option and be able to do our select subject to see what it automatically selects for us. We might get a little bit lucky and it might make a great selection and give us a great start. And it's not too bad. That's a pretty decent selection. So I'm going to grab the magnetic lasso tool to see if we can't go ahead and fine tune the selection. I'm going to do the subtraction option. I'm going to go ahead and subtract this selection out. And don't worry about this little hairs that come out. We'll be able to add that back in with the clone tool a little bit later, so you're not going to be able to select all those little fine hairs. That's okay if you don't include them in your selection. So now I'm just going around and doing the subtraction mode with the magnetic lasso tool and just lassoing these final little areas. I'm going to go ahead and select the ear a little bit, and once again those little hairs we're going to add back in later, so just kind of do a little bit of a rough selection. Make it as best as you can, but we'll go back in and not worry about those fine little hairs. So we're not going to worry about anything below the neck because that's all we need is the neck portion and the head, so don't worry about that too much. I went ahead and went to select and mask, and I'm just going to smooth out my selection a little bit, and I'm just going to make sure I add a little bit of feather, but remember not to do too much feather, so we're just going to back that off a little bit. And then I'm going to shift the edge a little bit inward so it kind of gets rid of some of that background in our selection. So we're just doing a negative shift edge. And just kind of making some minor adjustments. So before we bring in the photo, I wanted to take our image and make it 3,000 pixels just so it doesn't get so big in our Photoshop files and takes up too much space. Some of these things can get up to a gigabyte in size. So I just copied it, and then I did a Command V to paste our sheep. So now I'm going to position it what I think would be the right size for this document. I'm going to go ahead and take my eraser tool and just kind of erase around it a little bit. Next, we're going to take our man and cut him out so we can get our suit ready to put on our sheep. Now we're going to go to select and subject to see if we can't get a head start with this algorithm. So let's see how it selects it out. Just did select and subject and see what happens here. It's a pretty decent selection, so that saved us a lot of time. So now I'm just going to go back and use the quick selection tool. Go ahead and press and hold and see if I can't grab some of that extra stuff that it did not select. What I love about the quick selection tool is that you just press and hold and it kind of grabs and gobbles up everything. So it kind of makes selecting a little bit easier. So this is the quick selection tool, just kind of grabbing some things. A little bit easier and less cumbersome than using the magnetic or the magic lasso tool. So it just gives you a little bit more precision in terms of selection. Doing a quick time lapse here, kind of showing you finishing up my selections using the quick selection tool. Now that we got a pretty decent selection, we want to deselect the head because that's where the sheep head's going to go. So we're just going to go ahead and I'm just taking the quick selection tool. I'm going to go up and make sure I click on the subtraction mode for my quick selection tool up there. And I'm going to go ahead and just subtract that head out. So I'm just going to click and hold and magically it'll deselect that section. And you can change the size of the brush in terms of your quick selection tool. You can make it a little bit bigger to make it easier on you. So go ahead and make it a little bit bigger and make that selection a lot easier. Or in my case, I'm just going to use the polygon lasso tool and just lasso that thing out of there. Sometimes that's a little bit quicker than the quick selection tool. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to do something a little bit different. So instead of just cutting and pasting into the new image, I'm going to do what's called non-destructive editing. Non-destructive editing helps you not destroy an image, but be able to go back to the original image. So we're going to do that by adding a layering mask. So instead of cutting it, we're going to add a layering mask. So you'll be able to access the layering mask down here in this area. So you add layering mask, click it, and it's going to mask your selection over your photo. So now we just have the suit cut out, and this is a little bit different than just cutting it out, because now I can right click my mask and disable it, and I'll be able to get my original photo back. So it's a great non-destructive way to cut out an item. If you just want to add a mask, you can get the same effect as cutting it out, but it's not permanent. You'll be able to use that to modify that again. So I'm just dragging the suit back into our main photo so we can go ahead and gather our elements together. So now that we have all of our elements together, I'm going to resize everything. I'm going to go ahead and take our sheep head and size it to the position I think would look the most realistic. So I'm going to change the angle here and the size. So I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of an angle, kind of get a straight up angle, and bring it down a little bit just to make sure I have enough room for a neck. I don't want to make the neck too long or too short. So I'm just doing some just adjustments to get the right placement. So now we have a couple options here to try to get our nice skinny neck going on. We can use the lasso tool and just kind of cut those areas out and make a neck out of it. Or we can use the liquefy tool and be able to bring those elements in with the liquefy tool. Now let's just see how this works. It may not work out. We may end up just using the lasso tool and cutting it out manually, but let's just go ahead and experiment with the liquefy tool. So to get to the liquefy option, you're going to go up to filter, and you're going to go down to liquefy. And I'm going to use one tool, and that's the forward warp option. And I'm going to get a nice big brush. Sometimes the bigger the brush, the better, the more realistic. So there's the forward warp tool. That's how you access that one. And so we're going to do a nice big brush to get the effect. So we're going to get that nice thick neck. We don't want to have a really thin neck because the sheep would naturally have a thicker neck. So we're also going to broaden the shoulders. We're going to thicken the neckline a little bit so we can get more of that sheep head on there. So we don't want to have this little skinny neck and skinny body and this big sheep head. So we're just kind of using that tool and slowly bringing it out a little bit. And we're going to need to do the shoulders along with it too. So you'll notice when I reduce the size of the forward warp tool and try to do it, it looks a little unrealistic. So sometimes making it a nice big brush will give it a more realistic look. So yeah, that small one doesn't work at all, but a nice big one will grab everything for you and be able to pull it all together nicely. So just kind of doing some fine tuning with the shoulders so we can get a nice match with our nice thick neck. I think it'll look a little bit more realistic now that we've done this with the liquefy tool instead of just popping the head right in there. So that was a forward warp tool. Once again, that's the only one I'm using here today. I'm going to go ahead and click OK when I'm done. And there we go. It's not. So you'll notice that when we did it, it didn't exactly apply the liquefy tool, and that's because this is a layer mask. So when you have a layer mask, it only applies if you click on the layer mask selection. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go up to filter, and we're going to go down to liquefy and apply that same effect down onto our selection or our layer selection part of our layer mask. So go ahead and click on that right section to be able to apply it there. So now that we've done the liquefy tool on the suit, let's go ahead and do the liquefy tool and see how that works on the sheep. It may or may not work out, but we're going to give it a try. So we're going to select our sheep layer and just make sure that's selected and go down to filter and liquefy. We're going to do not the liquefy on the top, but the liquefy on the bottom. And we're going to go in, and the trick to this is being able to show the backdrop. So make sure show backdrop is included so you can see how it looks along with the suit, because it's not going to have that on by default. So click on show backup and increase the opacity so you can see how the suit and the sheep are going to look after you modify it. So we're going to zoom in a little bit. And we're going to go ahead and see, we're going to go ahead and use that same forward warp tool. We might need to reduce our brush just a little bit and kind of see if we can't tuck that into a neck-like position. So we're just kind of dragging everything down and trying to create a little bit of a neck. And this may not work out. We're going to go ahead and just give it a try. This would be the easiest way to do it, if it's possible, but it may not look a little too warped after we click on OK. But we're going to give it a try anyway, so let's click on OK. And so that neck doesn't look quite right. So we're actually going to go back in our history and go back to where it was, and we're going to try to cut it out just using our magnetic lasso tool. So with our magnetic lasso tool, we're just going to select what we think would be a great placement for a neck. And just cutting around, don't worry about cutting it out perfectly. We're going to go back with the clone tool and get some nice cutouts for our face. So you notice how we cut it out. It doesn't look very good, but we're going to go back later and kind of feather that out a little bit. So that looks like a good selection. So now we're starting to get our basic shape. We still have a lot of work to do with making our sheep head look realistic on this background, and we're going to do that here in the next lesson. We're going to really fine-tune our selection and make it look like it belongs on that background. So stay tuned. And we're also going to add a shadow to the neck to make that look really realistic.